Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We will have a very interesting discussion on a sometimes difficult topic on transboundary water affairs, how to move from risk to opportunities. The panel will be moderated by Mr. Aaron Wolf, Director of the Program in Water Conflict Management of the Oregon State University. He's also a member of the International Program and Drafting Committee of the Summit. May I kindly ask Mr. Wolf to join me on stage, as well as the keynote speakers. The panel members for now will be seated in the audience, but they will also join us soon. Thank you.
Mr. Minister. Yeah. Yeah, we'll have the two keynotes here, please. Thank you, Mr. Minister. So my master's degree is in sciences and my PhD is in policy, and sometimes you get a flash of the relationship between the two. So the science is, this is a session about mid-morning after the wine tasting event. And I seem to notice a correlation, an inverse correlation between the time people come into the first session and how much wine there was the night before. So those of you who are here, thank you for being here. Those of you who are still working off last night, we will welcome you when you come. For those who are here, we're grateful that you're here, and I'm grateful to be here in general. It's a spectacular meeting and an honor to me amongst such distinguished people on the panel and in general in the meeting, and I'm grateful to the organizers for all they've done. In this session, up until now, we've talked about the complexity of water resources, the crises, and the difficulties are immense. And we've talked about how difficult it is even to know what the problems are, let alone what the solutions are. And now we're going to throw yet another complication into the setting, and that's an international border. So yes, dealing with the hydrologic cycle in all of its nuance and in its cyclical nature is difficult enough. Now put an international border. Now you add two different legal systems. At the least, you add multiple languages, you add culture, maybe enmities, sometimes going back hundreds or even thousands of years, and the water that's not being managed as a basin or as a cycle is not being managed efficiently. So this is now our dilemma, and on the one hand, of course, there are headlines always about the impending water wars and the tensions and the conflict that come about because of these settings. But the record is actually interesting. If we look, first of all, the setting itself. When we hear about crises or conflicts, we hear about a couple of basins. There are actually 310 transboundary basins. We know this because of the work. Melissa McCracken is here, who is the director of, right here, director of the Transboundary Freshwater Dispute Database, who just helped us update this number. So now we can say with confidence, by the way, she's defending her dissertation in 2 weeks. If you need a really sharp investigator, see her at the coffee break. So we know now what the extent is. 310 transboundary basins, 40% of the world's population, half the land surface of the earth, 80% of fresh water originates in basins that are shared by 2 or more countries. And thanks to UNESCO's IGRAC program, we also know there's some 600 transboundary aquifers. So this complicates this, our ability to address the crises immensely, and yet there's some 600 treaties that have been signed by these countries. And we'll hear about the river basin organizations that have been developed. We'll hear even individual projects that are managed, a dam managed between Turkey and Armenia, for example, projects managed between Arabs and Israelis, India and Pakistan. And so we see either treaties or individual projects or even data sharing, sometimes implicit cooperation across these boundaries, that even though the complexities are there. Often it's presented as a dichotomy. Are these settings conflictive or are they cooperative? Well, the answer, of course, is they're both. But if we were going to generalize, there seems to be a timeline of sorts on a transboundary basin that countries generally prefer to develop within their boundaries, but at some point you can't. At some point, something you do within your country is going to impact your neighbor. And at that point, oftentimes, that's when the press gets really excited. That's when the politicians come out talking about, we'll defend the lifeblood of our nation and we'll withdraw from this agreement, and those people are trying to stop us from our legitimate rights. And this is when the headlines start to roar, water wars on the horizon, and water is the source of conflict. And all of this is true, and it makes tensions worse, there's no question. And then all of the things that have created those crisis points also start to draw the ingredients for cooperation. Having the attention, it brings the resources, it brings the right people in the room. It helps focus attention on the fact that this is an issue that needs to be resolved, because no matter how you feel about your enemy, you recognize they need water for the same very detailed and holistic needs that you have. So then you have a long period, sometimes 10, 20, 30 years of negotiations until you see the results, those 600 treaties, those implicit agreements, the explicit agreements, the projects that are in place. And so the keynotes that we have from two different parts of the world, one from here from the UNECE, where there's a rich agreement since 1992 that's become a model and has opened up to the rest of the world, and His Excellency the Ambassador from Iraq, where they have had agreements with their upstream neighbors and are now working in a very difficult setting to try and work up into a more detailed and more comprehensive agreement with the neighbors. So the structure will be as followed. We'll hear from our two keynote speakers. We leave our panel comfortable in their seats, being able to look up. We'll call everybody up at the end of the keynotes. Hopefully one, maybe two rounds of questions with punchy short answers, not like an academic would do for an hour and a half. And hopefully, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but it's up to the panelists, that we'll have some time for questions from the audience, because I think there's been some burning need for more interaction. So we call, without further ado, our first keynote speaker, Mr. Kira Ilioski. He's a director in the Office of the Executive Secretary at UNECE, originally from Macedonia. The floor is yours. Yeah, thanks.
Jona Podkivano, ministers, excellencies.
Good morning.
Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you very much.
Ministries, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to be here with you at the Budapest Water Summit and to address you in the very important session, how the moderator mentioned. I would like to extend thanks to Hungary for organizing this very important event, and very timely, I say. Water is it's one of the most pressing challenges facing the world. We are all here now in the Budapest for this exact reason. Compounding the complexity we face in addressing those challenges is that in so many of these cases, the variety of the water risk is inherently shared risk. Danube River, which is dividing this beautiful city, Budapest, is the great example in Europe how water-connected people, countries make benefits for all citizens in these parts of the region. And I would like to mention 60% of the global freshwater flow is in transboundary basins. Of 40% of the world population live in such basins. Governing those waters in a cooperative, equitable and a sustainable manner is critical for sustainable development, conflict prevention, peace and climate change resilience. This understanding is clearly recognized in the 2030 agenda, and in particular is target 6.5, which calls upon countries to implement an integrated water resources management of the all-level risk, including through transboundary cooperation. Why is this so important? Transboundary cooperation can generate benefits, economic, social, environmental, political, which foster development and stabilize society. For example, the good example is Senegal. Basin cooperation also foster regional integration and access to the energy, etc. Transboundary cooperation also helps preventing conflicts and consolidating peace in the post-conflict situation. For example, the Sava Agreement on the water was the first intergovernmental agreement to be signed between Balkans countries, which I'm coming, how the moderator mentioned, after the Balkan War. Transboundary cooperation helps building regional organizations that reinforce regional stability and integration. For example, the Lake Chad basins. Commission is also leading to multinational joint task force in the Lake Chad region for the armed fight against terrorist group. The Lake Chad basin shows the shared basin are often particularly vulnerable and disaster and the climate change. Transboundary water cooperation is therefore essential for addressing water crisis due to climate changing and disasters. It helps to prevent the conflict, the tension over the unilateral adaptation measures, and at the same time, cooperation makes disaster risk reduction for more effective by enabling the sharing of data of those reducing uncertainty by enlarging the planning space and the locating measure where they have the optimum effect. Cooperating in the preventing climate-related water crisis is often a common priority which can even help to initiate a broadened transboundary cooperation between countries. It can contribute to the regional integration, peace and prevention of the conflicts. An example is the Neman Basin in the Eastern Europe, where the joint climate change adaptation project between Belarus and Lithuania, implemented by UNECE, has promoted transboundary cooperation more broadly. Also, in many other shared basins, flood risk reduction was an incentive and a topic of cooperation at the outset. However, on the global level, cooperation in transboundary basin is in most cases not fit to deal with the range of existing and the future water risk and the crisis that we have spoken about so far about the summit. The majority of the international water courses lack cooperative management arrangements. Many agreements are negotiated but not enforced or not implemented properly. This is apparent from the analysis of the first monitoring of the SDG indicator 6.5.2 on transboundary water cooperation jointly carried out by the UNECE and the UNESCO 2017-2018, how you are seeing on the screen. Let me start with the positive news. Everybody likes the positive news. That's the reason why we are here. 107 countries out of the 153 sharing transboundary waters have submitted the national report of their transboundary cooperation, which is remarkable for a new indicator of such a sensitive topic. Globally, the average percentage of the national transboundary basin area covered by operational arrangement is only 59% for those 62 countries, where data could be clarified. However, merely 17 countries reported that cooperation is operational on all their transboundary basin. You can see also on the map. This demonstrated that in many parts of the world, cooperative arrangement for transboundary rivers, lakes, and the laking of too weak to deal with growing water-related challenges. Governance arrangement for those waters need to be established or the strengthening in order to offer an enabling environment to integrated water resources management, investments, development, environmental protection, and in general to reap the numerous benefits that transboundary cooperation has to offer. With the global opening of the UNEC Water Convention and the Water Courses UN Convention in 2014, there are now two framework conventions at the global level supporting transboundary water cooperation. Those two global water conventions offer a coherent package of norms and a common language for facilitating cooperation and the common understanding among countries sharing transboundary rivers, lakes, and the groundwaters. The United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is calling on the country to join on two conventions. He also has requested all United Nations agencies and departments to support countries in acceding to the convention and in implementing it. You can see also on the screen what I said about UN Secretary General Guterres. UNEC Water Convention has a unique intergovernmental framework through which it helps to prevent water crises in transboundary basins by fostering dialogue, the development of agreements, and setting up of the joint bodies. After more than 20 years of implementation in the pan-European region, the positive impacts of the convention are evident. In the early 90s, when the convention was negotiated, only few transboundary basins had agreements regulating their joint management. Now, it is completely opposite. Only few basins in the region do not have a cooperative framework. The convention has dramatically driven cooperation. And we should not forget, this is happened in a period of the very difficult economic and the political transition. This slide behind me shows that EU countries are now connected with the transboundary agreement. The convention has also inspired practical cooperation beyond the UNEC region. My UNEC region is 56 countries covering 3 continents, the North America, Europe, and the Asia and Middle East. Such water charters of the Lake Chad and the Niger River Basin and transboundary agreements between Kazakhstan and China. Accession by Chad and Senegal in 2018 turned the convention into the global intergovernmental platform and transboundary cooperation. In addition, more than 15 other countries are in the process of accession. During the Water Summit this day, here we have a good news from the several countries. Overall, more than 120 countries are involved in the convention activities, benefits of its many capacity building activities and the usage tools. How you can see on the slide, the 88 countries participate in the last meeting of the parties in the Nur Sultan in Kazakhstan. There is strong political support for the convention by parties which actively promote it, from the European Union to Hungary, and the newest parties to the convention, Chad and Senegal. And the River Basin Commission, such as Volta Basin Authority of the Niger Basin Authority, encourage their members to become parties to the conventions. I encourage the other countries and the partners to follow those examples. Why this is very important? The convention can help mobilize political will. It offers a political forum in the United Nations system to address the multiple challenges facing the sustainable management of the shared resources and to position those challenges high on the global political agenda. That's the reason why this summit is very important, because with the support of the President of Hungary, we bring very high-level political presence. The Water Convention, through institutional framework, offers the well-proven political and the technical intergovernmental platform for the exchanging experience and dealing with the emerging challenges. The Water Convention also helped to prevent water crises due to climate change and the disaster. Since more than 10 years, the Convention worked on adaptation to climate change in transboundary basins. Let me explain. First of all, the Convention offers a platform to foster exchange and the mutual learning to how to prevent the water crisis, and to build capacity to increase resilience to climate change. This is done through the Convention Task Force on the Water and the Climate, co-chaired by the Netherlands and Switzerland, with regular trainings and the global workshop. You can see on the screen that work of the Task Force on the Water and the Climate. Secondly, the Convention has developed many policy and the guidance documents which identify the best existing experience and the practice and can guide countries' efforts. One example is the implementation guide for addressing water-related disaster and transboundary cooperation. Thirdly, the Convention has increased adaptive capacity in the number of transboundary basins around the world by helping them to develop joint adaptation strategies, and implementation concrete adaptation measures. Two examples. I will also see on the screen that the Dniester Basin shared between Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, and the Chu-Talas Basin in Central Asia shared between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The two global conventions offers a unique opportunity to accelerate progress worldwide and address some of the root challenges in the transboundary cooperation. And therefore join the United Nations Secretary General in calling on all countries promote the full implementation of and accession to the Water Convention. The coming years offer many opportunities for the further discuss and advance transboundary water cooperation, for example, at the World Water Forum to be hosted by Senegal in 2021. UNEC is delighted to contribute as a strategic partner to the priority on transboundary cooperation at the forum. I would like to encourage all countries and organizations to contribute to this very important forum. At the end, as a conclusion, I will just say, let us working together to preventing water crisis on the transboundary waters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ilyatsky. A terrific, not just a document, but a process that UNECE has been helping shepherd countries in need through. So thank you so much for all of this work. We're honored to have His Excellency, Mr. Jamal Al-Adli, Minister of Water from the Republic of Iraq, a very different setting, but equally informative. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours. Thank you. Good job.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, I would like to express my thanks and gratitude to His Excellency the President of Hungary and the government of Hungary, especially the government, the Hungarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade for inviting us to attend and participate in the Budapest Water Summit, which is being held under the theme Preventing Water Crisis. This theme is very important in the time of escalating warnings from water crisis in the globe in general, and specifically in the Middle East region, for what this region is witnessed in fluctuations among its countries in water availability, food security, and energy production. This in turn would negatively impact agriculture and energy security. Its consequences would extend the appear in the form of instability, migration, and unsecured economy, as well as the influence on sustainable development. As you all know, Iraq is depending in its water resources on Tigris and Euphrates rivers and their tributaries. The majority of the two rivers' water originated out of Iraq borders, from Turkey, Syria, and Iran. Iraq is in turn a downstream country for both rivers. Therefore, Iraq faces many challenges in water management. The most important challenge is the storage and irrigation projects that are being implemented by the upstream countries without any consulting with Iraq. This led to a huge shortage in water allocations, as well as deterioration in its quality, besides Besides the climate change effect, which has influenced the region and Iraq in specific, the last decade has witnessed consequent drought years with a decrement in the country's water amount reached to approximately 50%. This indicates the major risk of drought and desertification that Iraq will face in the near future and a threat to its environment. Iraq has put its effort since more than 50 years from now to achieve cooperation through inviting the upstream countries to negotiate and reach a final agreement about water shares for each country according to the principles and provisions of water law and the principles of water conventions. However, there is still an absence for the permanent agreement specifies the share of each country in water of the two rivers. This is due to the weakness in cooperation among the riparian countries and the postponement position of the upstream countries, which discourages finding practical and balanced solutions to share benefits. The Ministry of Water Resources has accomplished the strategic study of water and lands in Iraq and set a roadmap to develop water resources. It also adopted implementing of a number of projects like dam construction for hydropower generation and others. This year, the climate change has caused advent of a huge amount of rainfalls in Tigris and the Euphrates river basins. The Ministry of Water Resources has taken its measures to control the flooded water and followed a plan to restore or to store the major amount of it and discharge the rest of this water for summer agriculture and environmental flow purposes. Finding a fixed legal framework for fair and sustained water management and use is an important matter for the whole globe. The effort of international community are evident in this regard. One of its significant results is the endorsement of the United Nations Water Convention for Law of Use of Water Courses in 1997. This convention is complementary and just in its provisions and considers the rights for all riparian countries. Iraq has signed and joined the 1997 Water Convention in 2001. For its importance, especially for the downstream countries. However, despite the access of this convention into force since August 2014, which considers to be an important improvement in international water law, there are challenges and ambiguities in the situation of Iraq in implementing the provision of 1997 Water Convention and achieve the expected goal, considering that neither our neighbors, Turkey nor Iran, has joined it. The UNECE of 1992 Water Convention is compatible with the 1997 Water Convention. Both conventions have same provisions that stipulate the equitable and reasonable use of water, as well as strengthening cooperation in transboundary water and the measures related to environment and water management. For these reasons, the Ministry also seeks to join the UNECE 1992 Water Convention, and it is now in the final steps of authentication at the Iraqi Parliament. The natural water inflows of Tigris and Euphrates rivers are less than the water needs that the riparian countries are planning for. This requires these countries to reach agreement on decreasing the areas of their future plans in order to be able to benefit from the available water in wise and better form. It is not accepted according to law and sense that the upstream countries invest the majority of water to secure their needs at the time that the downstream countries are unable to secure irrigating their existing project, as the situation is in Iraq. The existing of hundreds of shared rivers in the world among different riparian countries may raise at any situation a dispute in water sharing. This may happen when the upstream countries act individually in the water course without consulting with the downstream countries and not accepting the principles of cooperation and negotiation. We have previously suggested in the last UNESCO International Conference for Water in Paris the possibility of forming an international water court connected to the Security Council to solve such water dispute. The court decisions will be binding for all parties. The water coursing according to the principles of justice, similar to the International Justice Court. The Ministry of Water Resources has participated in many initiatives and projects for implementing sustainable development goals. It has also participated in the majority of the international forums that have been held by the United Nations or its related international organizations. The Ministry has followed its recommendations in the purpose of achieving the global sustainability and fruitful cooperation according to the ability of the Ministry and the available resources. Solving water issues with the upstream countries through identifying the share of each country in the two rivers. Water would be the horizon of cooperation widely. This will contribute in securing international peace and fade away the probable dispute among them. Before I finish, I would like to say that rivers were created before borders, so people in the downstream have the same rights as those in the upstream. Finally, I repeat my thanks and appreciation for the organizers of the summit, and I hope its outcomes will be fruitful and enhance the global cooperation and to achieve sustainable development for water resources and environment in the globe, and to appreciate the blessing of water that every life in all its forms is depending on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. A beautiful expression. Rivers were created without borders, and now we have to do our work to get back to that state. I now invite the panelists to come forward, please, and join us here on the stage. You come there through the side. So in order, we'll have Mr. Zahid Farouk, a State Minister, Ministry of Water Resources from the People's Republic of Bangladesh. Ms. Sarah Beck, Director of Water and Marine Affairs, Ministry of the Environment, the Republic of Finland. Mr. Franz Rojas, Coordinator of the Water Agenda, Vice Presidency of Sustainable Development of the Development Bank of Latin America. Mr. Peter Kovacs, President of the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube. And Ms. Susanna Schmeier of IHE Delft Institute for Water and Education. Thank you for joining. And I think if you don't mind, I'll start. Mr. Farouk, you've heard this very eloquent description of what it's like to be downstream in one part of the world. You also have an interesting neighborhood in upstream of Bangladesh, and I wonder if you could share us your perspective of what it's like to be downstream and what you would ask for of anybody's upstream neighbors in order to allow them to develop as they need to while protecting your rights and your needs.
Good morning. To start with, I would like to express my gratitude and thanks to His Excellency the President of Hungary, who has organized this, under his leadership, has organized this Budapest Water Summit 2019. Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am from Bangladesh. We have all heard the speech delivered by Iraqi Minister, Water Resources. We are also enjoy and see being a lower riparian country, Bangladesh. In fact, Bangladesh is located in a place where we have India, Nepal, Bhutan, China in the upper riparian, and we are in the lowest part of the lower riparian country. Bangladesh is a very small country. It is area-wise is 147,560 square kilometers. The country with thickly populated 160 million people staying in these small areas. Per square kilometer is 1,200 people we live in per square kilometer of area. So we have 400 rivers in Bangladesh, and 57 rivers are transboundary. Out of that, 54 rivers coming from India, and 3 other rivers are from Myanmar. As a matter of fact, total in the water in the monsoon season we receive from the upper riparian countries is 1,147 billion cubic meter. And in the monsoon, 80% of the water coming from the upper riparian, so we don't need so much of water. But then in the dry season, we only get 88 billion cubic meter of water we receive, where we need 147 cubic meter of water. So we are in a problem. In the monsoon, we have a lot of waters which we don't need. We can't hold those waters. And in the dry season, we have less waters. Now, in monsoon season, as a matter of fact, 1 billion tons of sediments, it comes from the upper riparian countries in our areas. So is 1 billion tons of sediments coming in our areas. It has become so difficult for us to accommodate all those rivers and sediments. That's why we face the problems of overflowing of waters. We face our river banks gets eroded because of another reason that we have our soil conditions are very soft. So every year we face difficulties. The erosions and the river villages gets eroded and swept the villages during the monsoon season. We are maintaining a very good relationship with our neighbors. We have a Ganges Treaty held in 1996 with our Honorable Prime Minister had a meeting with our counterpart with India. And we are having a treaty in 1996. According to that treaty, we are sharing waters, Ganges waters. We are also working on other rivers like Tista, and we are hoping that in future both the prime ministers of Bangladesh and India will work on it and will find out a friendly solutions which will be good for both the people of both the countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to move to Ms. Schmeier, also currently in a downstream country, currently at flood level, but a very different setting. And Susanna, you know more about river basin organizations, I think, than anybody alive. You've written a book on them. You've studied them both from the inside, work in the Mekong River Commission and for GIZ all over the world with different basin organizations. Stefano Berchi talked about the importance of law and structure in last session on governance. And I guess my question for you is what's the status of river basin organizations in these relations between upstream and down, or rivers that have different sets of needs or different histories? How can a river basin organization help moderate the day-to-day relationships between countries? What do you see as the best practices? Where do you see the challenges? What can the world of river basin organizations offer this world of transboundary waters?
So Aaron, I think if we want to understand the role of basin organizations, we have to go back to what you said in your introduction, that countries tend to prefer to cooperate instead of engage in conflict over water resources, simply because they acknowledge, in most of the cases, that short-term unilateral behavior is not as promising in the long run as to cooperate with their neighbors, because as you said in the introduction, water, and as was also highlighted by you, water tends to cross borders, hence we have to address this in a cooperative way. But I would like to add to that just acknowledging the need to cooperate, or even committing to cooperation in a certain moment, for example, by signing an agreement, won't be enough. It's not going to provide the benefits of cooperation that can only be generated if countries cooperate over time, either by addressing joint challenges, water quality has been mentioned by the Minister, water quantity, or by actually setting up projects from joint monitoring all the way to jointly owned infrastructure, as we see in the case of the Senegal Basin, to provide the benefits that otherwise would not have been generated if they acted unilaterally. And this is exactly where basin organizations come in. They help institutionalize a commitment that was made at a certain point of time and carry that forward, especially in times when things get a bit tougher. So there will then be a forum that brings together countries in a coordinated way to take joint decisions, or that helps them address a certain dispute that would otherwise not be addressed or not in an institutionalized forum. And what we see, for example, in the Mekong River Basin compared to other basins, if there is a basin organization in place, disputes, for example, over the development of dams on a river in an upstream country, tend to be addressed in that forum, maybe not to the complete satisfaction of everyone involved, but definitely in a way that they do not tend to escalate as much as they do in other basins that we see around the world. So I think basin organizations do play an important role in moderating between countries, especially when times get tough. But also, for example, referring to the UNECE Water Convention and also the 1997 Convention, basin organizations also play an important role in translating these global norms of international water law into something that's tangible and operationalizable for a basin, because a certain norm of international water law, such as the principle of equitable and reasonable utilization or no harm, will mean something very different in a basin as water-rich as, let's say, the Congo or the Danube, compared to a basin that is very water-scarce, such as your basin, Your Excellency, or many basins that we see in the MENA region or also in the southern part of Africa. So making things tangible for a basin and bringing together the countries is their contribution. But if you also asked about the challenges, I think there are many. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I'd like to highlight that a basin organization can only be as strong as its member states want it to be. So the criticism that we're seeing around the world of RBOs being paper tigers, being toothless, is not in the end the basin organization itself, but it's what the countries make of it. So you'll only get the benefits of cooperation out if you strengthen the organization to an extent that it's able to fulfill its mandate. And we see that with the more than 120 basin organizations around the world, that they're very different in terms of mandate, in terms of the strengths, the power they have vis-a-vis their member states, what they're allowed to do, anything from just meeting more or less regularly, all the way to, in the case of the Senegal, jointly owning infrastructure, and that will in the end determine whether they remain paper tigers or actually get something going on the ground.
So let me come back to something you said, that there are critics and there are challenges. Of the criticism that we know, certainly in the academic world, is that any of these instruments, the treaties, the river basin organizations, address the state. And so we miss always the non-state actors. We embed power imbalances within these documents and institutions. There are many voices that aren't in the room, and often we miss the indigenous expertise or the local expertise. Gender issues often unraised. So I guess that would be my follow-up question. Is we understand the state of RBOs now. What do you see their evolution to incorporate more of the voices that aren't being represented?
I think we do see positive developments, maybe not in all the basins of the world, but in many, with RBOs increasingly integrating local voices, also the voices of the youth, of indigenous communities, either through stakeholder engagement processes that are very, very formalized. For example, talking again about the Mekong River Commission, but you also see this in the ICPDR, in the Danube, for example, organizing regular stakeholder platforms in which the different communities can voice their interest, or in the case of the Danube, even join governance meetings of the Commission to bring in their specific concerns and their interests. But I think this is indeed one of the challenges where RBOs still have quite a bit of growth potential. Yeah. But I'd say in terms of bringing in the different voices of views, the women, indigenous communities, we as the water world as a whole, also as we're sitting here, still have a bit of a way to go.
Thank you. So just to recognize that Susanna will need to leave in 13 minutes, and so when she storms off the stage shaking her head, it's nothing personal for any of us or any of you. So, and thanks for bringing up the Danube, because Peter, you're the next person I wanted to ask. The Danube has more riparians than any other basin. The River Basin Organization, as Susanna said, not only addresses state to state, but there is this rich infrastructure of stakeholder dialogue, of incorporating at least the environmental issues, development issues. Tell us about the state of the Danube. First of all, thank you. I thought of you as the moon was rising over the Parliament, over the Danube. I said, thank you, Peter, for this beautiful view. Tell us about the state of the state of the Danube, and what might the rest of the world draw from what you've done?
Thank you, Aaron. Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think the Danube case is one of the best cases on the world. This is the most international river basin, we are saying well, everywhere. The Danube is shared, in fact, by 19 countries, and 14 countries plus the European Union joined to the Treaty of the Danube Protection. If I going back to the beginning from the point of view of risk management, I think everything is started with some risk management, with flood especially. Flood is a very big danger on the Danube Basin, on the entire basin. And also the pollution of the 70s, 80s also made a triggering of the, let's say, starting a negotiation, not only on bilateral, but also on the multilateral level. On bilateral level, we have a long history of cooperation. For example, with Austria, we have a Transboundary Commission working since 63 years with the same agreement. It did not change that time, or since that time. And on the Danube Basin itself, we are started with a technical cooperation with the environmental program for the Danube River, which developed also a Danube Strategic Action Plan. And parallel with that, we also developed the Danube River Protection Convention. The convention was signed exactly 25 years ago, so we have a nice leaflet also produced, just especially for that case. We had to use a quite long piece of paper on both sides, just to highlight the main milestones and also the main achievements of the progress. I think it's really remarkable what we have reached during this period of time, and I think it's a very good example of how the very diverse countries can cooperate and work together. We are very diverse by economical means as well, and also by cultural means. You can imagine we are speaking 12 languages in these 14 countries. So we are using as our main communication English, which might be really helpful for everyone, because all the documents, all the publications available on English language. It is one is the advantage of the cooperation. And I think we have many opportunities. We are looking for the win-win solutions between countries or between regions. Mr. Ilioski already mentioned the Sava case, which is one of the biggest sub-basins. It has a peacekeeping role, the water cooperation. And I think we also, or I can highlight the cooperation which is going on the Tisza Basin, which is also very important, at least for Hungary. which is also a big basin threatened by very severe flood events and other pollution events. And I think in the future we still have many things to do. We have new challenges. Not only the old risks still exist. I mean, the flood is still one of the major issues. And everything is related with climate change. We have, let's say, more severe floods and more severe droughts. The extremization of the events which we are experiencing at this moment. So we need, let's say, keep with the technology. We are, let's say, facing with the digital water management, and this is one of the slogans also of the meeting today. And beyond the climate change, I think we will facing with problems with water distribution, water allocation. If we have such a processes that the low waters are even lower and lower, and the high waters are even higher and higher. So during the drought period, we might have problems with the allocation as well. That is why we also trying to do in the frame of the UNEC to make steps on the direction how to allocate water resources on the transboundary basis. I think it's a big challenge because it's a politically very sensitive issue. I know it from my case because Hungary and Slovakia has a famous case on water. And of course, other technical issues are also on the table, like sediment management due to the hydropower production, and also the floodplain management. I think it's a very important issue. As the floodplain is sedimented, they are, let's say, have a less and less capacity to keep back water. So it might be also a very big challenge. But I think with these results, we are on a good way, and I hope that the next volume of the 50 years of cooperation will be also elaborated very successfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And what you raise is so critical. Oftentimes you hear in the rest of the world, oh, sure, the Danube's easy because it's Europe and they all like each other and so. But we remember that they have the same challenges as anywhere else. The Sava is a good one. The fact that UNECE has taken on allocations, it's not something that you would expect in the European setting until we recognize that Europe often is a reflection of what's going on in the rest of the world as well. So thank you for that. France, what's going on in Latin America? You recognize it. We talked a little bit yesterday about the role of development banks, but in this particular timeline, when we're talking about shifting from risks to opportunities, what can a development bank do? Are you thinking about the politics encouraging cooperation across borders when you're thinking about an investment strategy? Tell us about your experience in Latin America.
Thank you, Arun, and thanks the organizers for inviting CAF. Yeah, as you said, we understand water crisis is a risk, but also an opportunity, and we are talking about transboundary river basins. We are talking about governance at multi-state level. And we understand it's very crucial because water demand is increasing with different water users like water supply, irrigation, industries, etc. But also climate change is exacerbating droughts and floods. And we can summarize, as Mr. President Janus others said yesterday, that three dramas. We have three dramas: too little water, too much water, and polluted water. So and it relates to transboundary basins as well. So going to Latin America, we could say that Latin America could be called the continent of water because we have 30% of the water availability, but it is asymmetrically distributed. So we have many challenges ahead because we have to face many water transfers from the Amazon basins to the Andean or highlands and its potential for conflicts. So that's why we understand that we are promoting to enhance treaties. It's very interesting to know that in Latin America we have 69 transboundary river basins. Some of them are well known, like the Amazon River Basin, and some of these transboundary basins have many treaties. For example, we have in La Plata River Basin 23 among treaties and agreements. We have others with 25, but some others, like Orinoco River Basin, has none. So we understand that treaties is a good starting point. It's not a solution, but it's a good starting point. So we understand that if countries are keen to work on these treaties, we are interested in supporting. And actually, we have recently published our new water strategy 2022, and it has 5 strategic objectives. For the moment it's in Spanish, but we are going to have the translation to English and Portuguese in the next month, so you can download from the CAF water page. And the 5th strategic objective is related to integrated water resources management, and it also covers transboundary river basins. Because we understand as multilateral development bank, it's not only a matter of financing or providing loans, it's also a matter of supporting countries to have sustainable development with peace and stability. And currently we are supporting 3 international river basins with the support of GEF and Adaptation Fund in the Uruguay River, for instance, between Argentina and Uruguay, and trying to identify vulnerability assessments and how to create an action plan, for instance. We are also working with the Rio La Plata River, comprising 6 countries, trying to coordinate and cooperate in the information, which is essential. It's basic, because if we don't have comprehensive and good information, it's difficult to take decisions, and conflicts could arise because of lack of information. So we are also offering countries to enhance hydrometeorological systems, because it's a need in the region. We have very scarce information about hydrology or precipitations or others. And we are also working in the Guarani aquifer, because one of the lacks in Latin America is the knowledge about aquifers. We know that some countries like Mexico are working very hard in knowing the aquifers, and we know that in Mexico, for instance, there are 80 aquifers that are overexploited, while we have no information in other countries of what is about aquifers, and also with the international aquifers. So that's one of the tasks we are promoting in the new strategy, and we are looking to work with countries in this direction.
That's excellent. The same question that I had for Susanna. No, for you, Franz. As you're doing this work and encouraging cooperation, encouraging investment, are there benchmarks or guarantees in place to make sure that indigenous voices are heard, that measures of justice are incorporated along with the investment strategy? Whose voices do you feel aren't being represented in the discussions, and are you aware of how to incorporate them increasingly in the future?
Yes, we have started, and we expect to increase in the future. Yeah. We are promoting some organization-based councils within countries, yeah. And also we are encouraging to create a coordination in the Rio La Plata, in the La Plata River. Because we understand that there are some information, but the starting point, as I said, is that there was no contribution in the information. So each country had different information and not sharing information. So this is a first step. Yeah. I know it's going to take time, but we understand that it's the only way to reduce conflicts and to have cooperation among countries.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So Sarah will bring a surprise to those of us who were trained in the hydrologic cycle. Apparently there's a whole part of the world where they put salt in the water. And I had understood that at the end of the hydrologic cycle, the water ends up in the delta and just stops. But apparently it doesn't. Sarah is in her title, she is, I lost you. You're the Director of Water and Marine Affairs. And I had to look up what marine meant. Can you tell us a little bit about the worlds of fresh water and of salt water and what they can learn from each other?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting, and thank you for the excellent seminar here. But thank you, Aaron, for the question, because I have been saying to many people that I love water with or without salt. I drink rather the fresh water. But anyway, I thought that I would talk about the Finland, Russia, Norway, Sweden cooperation on transboundary freshwater issues. But then I thought that it's a good opportunity to turn our thoughts also that at some point those transboundary rivers, they do actually discharge to the coastal areas. My first work among these transboundary issues were 25 years ago when I was asked to make a kind of evaluation of the transboundary marine coastal areas. So it was a very exciting thing. But anyway, there are some similarities. Actually, they are quite same processes. You need in the Baltic Sea, think about that there's 8 countries. I take the Baltic Sea as an example, what I'm telling you about the marine issues. 90 million people living in a catchment area. The status of the Baltic Sea was dreadful in 1970s. It has healed since that, but still it is not in a good shape. So we got a common vision that the Baltic Sea is in a bad shape. Where does the discharge and nutrients actually do come? They come from the catchment area. So there was a common problem that 8 countries has to share. So what we had was the same kind of ingredients, that we had a common topic of environment. We got the talented scientists and experts to talk about and think about how we can change the data to the information. That term was used yesterday. I very much like that. And how we got this information, how we can then change to the actions. What you need as ingredients on that, kind of a commitment from the experts and also the civil servants that we need to do something for the good common water body called Baltic Sea. So what we need is a trust. We need the trust to each other, we need to trust to the data, we need to work with the experts and talk about a lot. So what happens in the 70s, the Convention of the Baltic Sea was formed, and since that it has worked in a cooperation with ups and downs, of course, with the financial problems, but then a cooperation goes along, and very well we have worked at the moment. And in this respect, I would like to turn your idea that there is a big river between Sweden and Finland which discharge the waters directly to the Baltic Sea, where there is a common borderline between Sweden and Finland. So we need to think of what the river does actually in the coastal areas as well. So in that respect, I would like to draw your attention that the transboundary issues, even we are talking about the freshwater issues, we ended up also to talk about it in the marine issues, especially in the coastal areas. So trust, and once more what we have learned in the transboundary freshwater issues and the Baltic issues is that we need the stakeholders' involvement, a lot of people working on those issues to see the benefits, ecological benefits, economical benefits, social benefits, and my motto has been that if we work in the catchment and send a fresh water to the Baltic Sea, it might heal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thanks to the restraint of the entire panel, we will have some time for questions. I would like to go down quickly, and this question of how do we separate dialogue? So we have the freshwater conversation in one place, the saltwater conversation in another, the energy conversation somewhere else, and there's so much to learn from each other. And as an educator, I'm interested in how do you educate people better to do this work. And so Eddie Moores, who's rector of IHE, was talking in the last session said that we need more soft sciences. We need to be able to, we can train people technically in water resources, but what other skills do they need? So I'd like to, well, let me ask in the audience first, just out of curiosity, how many people feel they're really well technically trained in water resources? Technically trained. For some reason, you're all sitting on this side of the room. That makes me a little nervous. And how many people feel they're really well trained on the social side or the legal side or the economic side? 3 of you. Excellent. So this, I think, is part of the problem. How many people feel they're really well trained on both the technical and on the social science? 1, Aaron, of course. Yeah, 2, 3. So similarly on the panel, when I was looking at the background, Sarah is a marine biologist originally. Franz is the only person up here, I believe, who has degrees in both, has a technical master's and a PhD in policy and planning. So my question, just quickly down the line, would be if you were advising people in universities. There's a couple of programs that try and do this. IHE Delft, you heard of, Oregon State, a couple of others are really trying to think about how do you train the next generation of water champions in a way that they can do the conflict work that's necessary. What would you add to a young person's training? What skills, as you've come into your own, have you found that you weren't trained for when you did your university training? He's looking at you, so I'm going to start with you, Peter. Give him some time to think about, please.
Yes, thanks, Aaron. I might start with this educational issue. I think we are the only river basin organization who has a special expert group on public participation. Yeah. And we think education is really key of the success. Yeah. Yeah. We are celebrating the Danube Day each day. This is 29th of June when the convention was signed. And we are putting a big emphasis on education of the very young generation as well. We developed several educational kits for the children, which are mostly translated also into national languages, not only on English. And we also promoting all kinds of activities related to that. The expert group is making also a tremendous work because they are who are shaping our public activity as well. And we're also trying to involve the stakeholders as much as possible, but not only the young generation, but all water users.
Yeah, thank you.
As Susanne already mentioned, we have regular meetings for the stakeholders, and also we have around 30 observers working with us. They are regularly participating on the meetings and they can express their advices. Of course, the decisions finally made by the countries, because the countries taking the burden of the work. And I think we are quite successful on that means.
Thank you. Franz?
Thank you, Aaron, for your question. Let me tell you briefly my experience. When I was in charge in a development program to reduce non-revenue water in water utilities, we started working in technical issues, and very rapidly we understand that it was more complex than just technical solutions, because we had to understand that there are corporate governance within the water utilities, there are some political interference, and there are some very small, because they are divided in different municipalities that perhaps they are atomized and they have no aggregated value. So we understood that we needed to understand better what could we do. That's why, in my case, I decided to do my PhD in moving from hydraulic masters to public policy and governance. And I could transfer this knowledge also in general in the water sector, because as transboundary basins and also dealing with water is essentially politics. And President Fouchon from the World Weather Council says many times that water is politics. Yeah. And if we understand that, then we could try to devise better policies, because as one said, fix the institutions to fix the pipes. I think it's very true. And it's also applied for in this case about a transboundary river basis, because if we understand that it's very political, so we have to include in the treaties conflict resolution mechanisms, and also to understand the variability of hydrology, to have mechanisms very flexible in case of droughts or in case of floods, and it's more than technical perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I like that. Water is politics. Sir, what didn't you learn as a marine biologist that would have been useful in your job?
Yeah, being here in a podium, I have learned a lot at work. I was marine scientist, emerged to the fresh water immediately. I tried to learn, but how I learned, not alone, not reading the directives or the book of law, I learned from my colleagues. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking, I don't know if it's the right way to say in English, but learning at office and learning from your colleagues, learning at your work. So what we have done in the water issues and also in marine issues, that there is a group of scientists, different fields, and multidisciplinary is the word that we need to think about how we work now, how we can convince the stakeholders that we have considered the question from the different angles. So that is the one thing. But coming from the Ministry of Environment, of course, we need the good support of a lawyer. Always, marine biologists need a good lawyer beside.
I think those are words to live by. We all need the support of a good lawyer.
So work together. Yeah. The one thing which we have now realized in the Ministry of Environment, that we do a work which doesn't opens up to the young postdocs or things like that. So we have a new program, hopefully running from the next year on, that we hire just graduated doctors for 1 or 2 years. They can do their science in our office and write up the papers, but 40%, if they are willing, they can learn the processes what we are doing in the ministry. We can immerse them in a situation like this, how we do the water policies, marine policies, how we implement the directives and legislation, so they can have an insight of the work that they could hopefully get the job. Yeah. No one, not all of them can find the bread in the science. Nice. So we need them also in the administration. So that is the one thing. Learn at work, learn from your colleague, work with your colleague, and train young people to learn the science, how they can apply their data information to the management actions.
Nice.
Thank you.
And get a good lawyer, as you said, please. So our two ambassadors are both engineers, I think, by training. How can we help? What should we be teaching our students so that they then become successful ambassadors? Sorry, ministers. No, please. I'm an academic. I don't understand the difference.
In fact, I was hearing the guests, they have been speaking out the different problems of the respective areas. But I feel, I was just thinking that in the world, different areas has different problems of the transboundary rivers. They have their political problems, they have geographical problems, they have the economical problems. So you cannot relate European transboundary problem with the Asian transboundary problems. So there are the different types. We are working out with our neighboring countries, India, Nepal, Bhutan, to work out and solve our regional problems. And I believe on the first day, the Jordanian Water Resources Minister has pointed out one thing, that they teach young boys in the schools about the importance of the use of waters. Yeah. And that has really, I like that idea, and I believe once I go back, I will request my government to implement the same thing in our country also. Yeah. That is very important for our future generations. They must understand the importance, and we are facing the scarcity of waters in worldwide. That's why after so many, passing so many years, now we are becoming more important, giving more importance on the water crisis. We are having seminars every year or so discuss about the water problems. That is a very important aspect of it. So I believe that this water crisis as a regional problem. So in our area, the Asians, we are thickly, highly populated areas. So our problems have to be solved discussing with our neighboring countries how to solve these problems and understanding each other's problems, because both, especially Bangladesh with our neighboring country, India, Nepal, Bhutan, we understand each other's problems because both the countries are in crisis of waters because of overpopulations. So we need to sit down and discuss understanding each other's problem and find out a best solution. By doing that, both the countries can be benefited out of this, these problems.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Yes, I think water, as it is said in our Holy Quran, that all lives were created from water. So we have to take care about that. As a matter of fact, I'm a mechanical engineer. I have achieved a lot of goals in my career, but in certain time, I saw that I think I need to search in water resources because of the importance of this issue, especially to Iraq and maybe other countries also. So I deviated my research and went to how to maintain at least the quality of water in our two rivers, because the deterioration of the water in the rivers was very, very hard and very big. So I reached to an original result that since we have almost 2/3 of our population are living in the 2/3 of Iraq, the cities, and the 2/3 southern Iraq of this, all along the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. Fortunately, we have a third river that we have created for the desalination of soil, which were been accumulated for many years. So we use this third river to power in all the sewage water after treatment. This is my first project that I reached, that I have to see it on ground. Now we are starting to do this and saving our rivers from the sewage water systems that we have. It is important, I think, that we give knowledge to our children and grandchildren, of course, and to introduce the education of how to keep on guarding the water quality and quantities also, and how to conserve and keep this precious wealth we have. So my advice was to introduce lessons to the students in primary, secondary, and even in the also start to make some kind of intention to the researchers in Iraq and even our students outside Iraq to have more and more research concerning the quality and the quantity of water. Also the benefit of having groundwater, and we have to explore this and invest in this, although there is a certain quantity of salts in this water, but with the technology advancement in the world, I think this issue is getting more and more accessible and cheaper. So I think water is essential, and we have to take care and teach our people how to take care about it. Nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Kerry, you come from the other side, the foreign ministry side, the political side. How would you train people to do this job?
Actually, as a career diplomat ambassador, finally ambassador, because this is the minister. Aaron, how the Secretary General Guterres said, water is the human rights. The reason why we are promoting as a UNEC, which I am representing UNEC in this capacity, the two convention is not to just promoting and convincing actually the country to become the part of this very important initiative. One of the reasons is we are organizing the workshop, the training with the young people in the different region. This is the very important how we bring this expert level in the high level in this very important event. We are bringing young people, students in the very important event when we are organizing in the different region. Not to just to saying how the youth, how the young people is important to be part of all the future initiative and the important issue like water. To be part means to be part of the training, to be part of the workshop, to listening their voice, expertise, and the technical levels means that we are offering as a UNEC expert people, expertise, and to sharing with the different region and with the people which it's maybe sometimes with the part of the completely different background, educations and the culture. How the Peter said, if we are not organizing this training, we are not organizing the workshop, they will never sit together and to exchange the view, experience, positive experience. So if it's positive, we will implementing in our initiatives. If it's negative, we will try to not repeat it. The young people, student, must be actively part of any future important issue which we are talking today. Not just to saying, to bring in them and to be part. Thank you.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. So what we've heard is water diplomacy, water, and it requires training in both. We need to understand the water. We need to understand the diplomacy. As universities, we do this very, very badly. But I'm interested in your challenge to hear the youth. So we have exactly 7 minutes and 32 seconds. And why don't we start with anybody who feels young? And I say that it's an internal test. We have a time for a couple of questions. If you feel young at heart, please, you have the first question. I know, sorry, no offense. She looks like she's younger at heart. Please. Can we get a microphone? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. No, just keep talking. It's okay.
I raise my hand not because I feel young, but because I have a question. My name is Maria Rosel. I come from Venezuela. As I said in other sessions, my country, we have a lot of issues besides the humanitarian complex crisis. We have a lot of issues with water. And river pollution, oil spills, lake pollution, but coming to the transboundary water affairs, what would you say that are your mistakes, or what would you do differently, for instance, in the Saba Commission or Danube Commission? So what would you do differently and or mistakes?
So let's hold that. What mistakes have we made and what would we do differently? And here's a second question here.
And I live in Indus Valley. I come from Pakistan, and we have signed a treaty with India for transboundary rivers. And I would like to draw the attention of the honorable panelists to the theme of this summit, which is based on 3 pillars. One is scarcity of water, the other is abundance of water, and the third is pollution of water. So we are, as low riparians, facing all these 3 issues from across the boundary. So I want to ask the honorable panelists which and how you can enforce the upper riparians to stop such actions. And what name would you assign to this act if it is deliberate and politically motivated? And I can suggest one. It is
Okay,
water terrorism.
Okay. One last, please. We have one last question up here. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you for giving me the floor. This is Ambassador of Bangladesh, resident in Vienna. Well, in the first place, I'd like to thank both the keynote speakers for their very informative presentations from two different perspectives. And the panelists, they have brought up their respective countries' perspective on transboundary water issues. My question is to Mr. Kovas. As I know, there are upstream countries having few, hydraulic power plants. And do they pose any kind of problem to Hungary as downstream countries with respect to water flow? Because we are also a downstream country and facing a lot of challenges with excessive water and also minimum water when we need them. Thank you.
So we have three questions. One, what mistakes have we made? How would we do it different? How do you, I'm going to change the wording just a little bit, how do we help the upstream countries remember their obligations to the downstream countries? And then a specific question, how do you deal with the transboundary impacts? I'm going to ask you to keep an eye on that clock right there. And maybe one person can answer each of the questions. The first, obviously, is to you, Peter. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. You are entrusting me to answer to all the questions. Yes, I can do it in 3 minutes and 8 seconds, or hopefully less. So let's start with the last question. Yeah. Yes, we had problems with the upstream neighbors due to the hydropower generation. We had problem with sediment management. We had problem with water flow. And we are still negotiating. It's a never-ending story. My colleague already said water is a politics. I can agree. We could solve technically many problems, but we need a political willingness behind and political solution as well. If going back to Venezuela, what they can follow. If I putting my other hat on, I can suggest to join to the UNEC Water Convention. Because it might be a good tool for you to learn. And also I can offer, let's say, a consultation from my side as an ICPDR president. I think you can learn many things from the Danube case and the Sava case as well. How the economic and political situations were solved. And finally we are, let's say, working on a very good environment. And I don't know exactly what the third question was.
This was to you, about transboundary impacts.
And the second?
The second was, how do you induce an upstream country to remember their obligations to the downstream neighbors?
Through international cooperation.
So I think
of course, it's always a difficult question because upstream countries has completely different interests than downstream. Yeah. Yeah. We are in a lucky situation in Hungary. We have 6 upstream neighbors and 1 downstream neighbor. So we have obligation for both directions. You know, it's a long way. I might tell you, you need a long period and a lot of patience to solve the problems.
Yeah. And wisdom.
Yes, and wisdom.
Yeah, please.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, trying to answer the first question. As I said, I think treaties are very important and it's a starting point, but it's not a panacea. And we know that there are some treaties that didn't put into effect because they were like a corset. And I think that's one of the mistakes, to establish very tight treaties, and because at the end treaties is about negotiation. And some effectiveness of these treaties should be to be very flexible in terms of but establishing clear and flexible allocating criteria, equitable distribution of benefits, and also conflict resolution mechanisms and mechanisms for increasing resilience. So these are four aspects that should be considered, and as I said, very flexible because it's a matter of negotiating.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to encourage you, I know these were very, very big questions squeezed at the last minute. I'll encourage you to approach the panelists at lunch, but we don't want to stand between you and lunch. Before we thank the panelists and the speakers for this excellent session, I just wanted us to appreciate just a moment, again, the Danube, that here we are, and it's offered us so much in terms of models for treaties, for river basin organizations, but even, again, a different world than the treaty world or the freshwater world is the navigation world. And what the Danube gave us more than 100 years ago was this idea of a boundary being the Thalweg, being the deepest part of a channel. And this is so important conceptually, but also ethically. If the idea is that if you stay in the deepest part of the channel, navigation should be open to anybody along the river. No country has the right to put a chain or a wall across a river. That the idea of a free flow of people, of goods, of commerce, of the things that need to flow should have a mechanism to be able to move. And I think we can learn from this, as we have from our panelists, as we have from our speakers. So please, a big round of applause for everybody. And we will see you at lunch, please.
Thank you. Yes, so we will see you at 2:30. But before, please allow me to let you know that there are two side events happening right now, or we'll start soon. One is in Duna Room in this building, just one floor up. It's on cities and climate change after Paris, organized by the municipality of Kaposvár. There will also be a side event on the urgent need for effective intergenerational dialogue, which is organized by the Global Water Partnership and the International Secretariat for Water. So I wish you bon appetit, and I hope you will be able to look at some of the side events as well. Thank you very much also for the panel, for the discussion.